Welcome to the latest episode of Pinnacle's NFL Insights. I'm your host, Eric Eager from Sumer Sports, alongside PFF data analyst Ben Brown, to help guide you through the world of the NFL with week-to-week reflections and projections. We've made it, Ben, to the NFL playoffs and the wild card round. But first, let's go back to week 18 and reflect a little bit. Ben, you and I were at a poker tournament, a smoky place. Everybody was worried about the flop. Everybody was worried about their hole cards. And you and I were focused. We're half focused on our poker game, half focused, half being an understatement there, on the Jacksonville Jaguars versus the Tennessee Titans, because, Ben, we gave out 14-1 for somebody other than the Tennessee Titans to win the AFC South just a couple weeks ago on the show. And that came through with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And frankly, Ben, that carried me through the entire weekend.
Right. I mean, it was a good week 18, all things considered, I would say. But it started off, I would say, with your Kansas City Chiefs finally covering a football game in dominant fashion against the Las Vegas Raiders. And then, I mean, peak run good, I would say, Saturday night with the Jaguars winning but not covering. So we got Joshua Dobbs at the +6.5. We got the middle through the back door as well. So, I mean, you love to see it. I don't know if it speaks, I would say, too convincingly to where these Jags are going to end up, I would say, at least as far as like in the AFC playoff picture. But I think they are very much the most exciting team that we could have gotten to represent the AFC South. So I think from that perspective, it's good. I also think, the rest of the question marks as far as who is going to get into the playoffs, I thought resolved fairly well. I am excited to see Miami Dolphins led probably Teddy Bridgewater team in the AFC playoff picture as well. I do think they are pretty dynamic offensively still with, Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback, but that spread kind of moved, their wild card matchup kind of moved a little bit in their direction. I'm not sure if that signals, some Tua positive news coming up here in his concussion or not. I would be surprised to see him, but all things considered, I think week 18 wrapped up, I would say swimmingly from our betting perspective, at least.
Yeah, the only plays that I think we missed, Miami under 9 wins pushed because Miami won, of course. And then the Detroit Lions, were not able to get a loss by the Seattle Seahawks. They did win outright. They finished with a winning record. That was a wonderful outcome for us, but they did not make the playoffs. It was still a pretty fun weekend. And in fact, Ben, not to, brag for you, but you had a very, very good hit. I think a 6-1 hit on the Browns to finish last place in the AFC North. That only happened with a victory by the Pittsburgh Steelers on Sunday. So that was cool. To your point, though, let's talk about week 18, because college football is over. We don't have any, anything more to talk about. Georgia won convincingly against TCU last night. In fact, it was absolutely no fun to talk about that. So let's talk as we venture on from week 18 to the playoffs here. In the AFC, the Kansas City Chiefs are +330 to win the Super Bowl. The Buffalo Bills are +400. Philadelphia is +500. San Francisco is +501. Cincinnati, the only other team under 10-1 at 8-1. When you look at the AFC, Kansas City +165, the Bills 2-1, the Bengals 4-1, Chargers 10-1. NFC, you have the Eagles at +170. You have the Niners at +190, the Cowboys at 11-2, and Tampa Bay at 10-1. Do any of those, Ben, signal anything about the market that maybe after 18 weeks we don't already know?
Yeah, I would say that either the market, I would say, is still pretty low on the Kansas City Chiefs overall, or they're probably not valuing the number 1 overall seed and the Chiefs kind of having that first round bye probably as much as it should actually be impacting the playoff outlook. Because I do think the Chiefs at +164, now currently at Pinnacle.com with the Bills basically 10 cents behind them at +175. I think that's a little bit of a mispriced opportunity given where I kind of have these two teams power ranked, specifically with the Buffalo Bills defense. Definitely don't think that unit, I would say, is kind of trending in the right direction. And from the Kansas City Chiefs perspective, I think they're like a top 5 PFF coverage grade on the season now, which I would say is very much unexpected if you were kind of trying to, power rank where these Kansas City Chiefs are actually strong at. But they have Patrick Mahomes. They have, a receiving unit that is very much figuring it out. Andy Reid as a play caller has been absolutely special, especially in that Week 18 match against the Raiders. So I think the Chiefs are clearly ahead of the other two teams in the AFC. Maybe this is a little bit of an expectation of, the neutral site conference championship game, maybe being a little bit, of a reason why the Buffalo Bills are getting some love. But from that perspective, I think the Chiefs are very much, I would say, probably underpriced and undervalued here to win the AFC right now.
Yeah, I think so. And to me, it's just to me, it's just a symbol that even though the Chiefs got the 1 seed, and in fact, I've done a lot of Kansas City radio, I've done a lot of Twitter spaces trying to show that like the Chiefs got the best of it here by getting the 1 seed by virtue of the Bills and the Bengals not playing that Week 17 game. Having to play a neutral site AFC championship game in one instance, and that's if Buffalo wins the next 2 games, is not that much of a concession relative to everybody else. But what this signals to me, Ben, is that the Bills would be favored against the Chiefs if they played on a neutral field for the AFC title game. And that, to me, maybe that's true. I will say, even as somebody who roots for the Chiefs, when you've watched the Bills the last few weeks, when you've watched the Bengals the last few weeks, those are teams that peaked a little bit earlier. The Chiefs percolating between, under the surface for the last few weeks, I think are being undervalued here. The Chiefs, by the way, Ben, are a top 10 team in yards per play allowed and a top 10 team in net yards per pass attempt allowed. Sneakily actually had a pretty good defense this year. And as I pointed out on Twitter, they've averaged a full yard per attempt more to wide receivers this year than they did last year, even with Tyreek Hill in the passing game. So I think they are being undervalued a little bit here, Ben, and I do totally agree with you. Is there anything on the NFC side, that really sticks out to you? I think to the same point, when you look at Kansas City relative to Buffalo, Eagles have the 1 seed, but the Niners are much closer to them in odds than that would imply. I think if you have the Niners and the Eagles on a neutral, I think that the Niners would be favored. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I think it would definitely be favored. I do think if we see that matchup in the conference championship round, though, and it is in Philadelphia, like, I would be surprised if San Francisco was still, like the money line favorite in that particular situation. I think that's a spot where we'd probably see -1 to maybe even a pick 'em for the Philadelphia Eagles at home in that particular matchup. So I do think that, this is still a spot where the market maybe isn't fully pricing in, the value of the number 1 seed in comparison to kind of where we see that landing. So I don't know if I really want to buy into the Eagles, because kind of like what you touched on with the Chiefs and the Bills and the Bengals, like the Eagles, I would say, very much probably peaked too early, and they very much probably peaked, 7 or so weeks ago, and have kind of been in a little bit of a free fall ever since then. In some ways, the 49ers are still peaking right now. The Cowboys, for all intents and purposes, kind of had to have Jekyll and Hyde type performances in almost a weekly basis. So they're a team that I think is kind of tough to buy into as well. So it's hard for me to not go back to it, but I do think like the Buccaneers and the Vikings are probably the teams that I would be sprinkling some, decent long shot action on, because I do think the NFC is very much wide open. I think you can make a case for why either one of those two teams could potentially, maybe, it might take them winning a game that they probably shouldn't or don't belong in, or actually, aren't deserving of winning. But if that happens, they're still set up, I would say, quite well to probably win that NFC. So I do kind of lean in Dallas's direction if you are getting like a -2.5 price on the spread against Tampa Bay this weekend. But that number at +3, I think, was definitely a spot where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were a buying opportunity. So it'll be interesting. I think if Tampa Bay gets through Dallas here, they're very much going to be a dangerous team. But I also think there's probably a case to be made for Dallas being the correct spot if it is -2.5 as we get towards kickoff.
Yeah, for sure. I think you can only really grab Tampa Bay if they're 3 or better. I think the same thing is true about the New York Giants. So to your point with the Vikings and the the Vikings and Dallas, those are 2 teams where if you're getting less than a field goal with them, they might be the play. You have to do this calculation for yourself, and there's a little bit of art to it because you don't know who the second opponents are going to be for the Vikings and Cowboys. But one thing I would advise people before you place a futures bet, is to think about a money line rollover instead. Just because, again, you have more outs in that situation where if you let's say there's an injury, but the team is making a run, you can always buy out of a team during the middle of that relative, or just even like pull your money away relative to having, let's say, a 10-1 on the team of your choice and having to sort of do a weird little hedge there. So just do that for yourself. In most cases, the money line rollover makes more sense than betting the future itself, but there are other cases where that's not the case. And in fact, it just also depends upon how you handicap the other games and who the team is going to face. So let's go to Q&A. And we did, it's so funny. Tweeted out, I think, drawings of us, and Ben, I think you come out a lot more favorably than me, but that makes sense. In that
probably likes
Q&A,
me more, I guess, is what he said.
From Pinnacle. But we got a few good questions. So at Joe Flag, the best value to win the Super Bowl as of right now, I think you said Kansas City, Ben. When I look at this, slate right now, and I'm looking at, who's the best team to win the Super Bowl, I probably, when I'm looking at this, have to take a stab at somebody like the Los Angeles Chargers at 23-1. I don't like the fact that Brandon Staley played his starters in Week 18 against Denver. I don't like that they lost despite that, for sure. But for the most part, that team had been ascending and had been getting healthier. They do have a great quarterback. Now, they're going to have to go on the road for all of their games for the most part in the AFC playoffs. But I do think that they're incredibly tricky to deal with right now. Of the teams that are like 20-1 or better, you're looking at these quarterbacks. You have Herbert, you have Brady, Cousins, I'm not really betting on. Lamar, probably not playing at 40-1 with Baltimore. Lawrence is a good opportunity, but I don't think the Jags have what it takes. And then the Giants, Dolphins, and Seahawks, really, I don't think are in contention. So among teams that are 21 or better, I do like the Chargers the most.
Yeah, I could definitely agree with that. I also think like the Cowboys are probably a little bit overvalued at even 13-1 there. So I would probably bucket them a little bit closer to the Los Angeles Chargers. And if I'm choosing, the Cowboys or the Chargers, the only reason I would ever want to buy in to the Cowboys is basically their path to the NFC. I think is a lot more clear than what the Chargers are going to be facing off against. But I'm with you. It's kind of the Chargers or bust. Maybe you think, Tom Brady has one more run left in him and maybe he gets to the Super Bowl and you can hedge from that angle. But I know people want to buy into the Buccaneers, especially after, somewhat of a decent offensive performance from the past couple of weeks. But I very much think that the matchup situation with what they're going to face in Dallas, could very easily, I would say, kind of find them a one and done in this playoff picture, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. So this actually, comes back to a question from Brad Brenner at Brad Brenner on Twitter. How significant could the injuries to Bosa and Williams be for the Chargers? How great is their head coach, and do they beat the Jags? Well, I don't think that their head coach showed me a lot here, right? I think playing your starters in a week, especially when you're the Chargers, and holy buckets, you've dealt with injuries forever. Would you even tempt that fate to me? I think right. Chase Daniel, especially with the Ravens losing in the 1:00 hour and you being absolutely, completely 100% locked into the 5 seed, I don't understand why you're even playing your starters in that case. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Bosa and Williams would be catastrophic. I think when you've looked at this market, next week, and we'll kind of blend those things together. The night game on Saturday, the Chargers are -1, -118, -126 on the money line against the Jags. This has gone down a little bit towards Jacksonville, in large part because these injuries do matter.
Right. I mean, they matter quite a bit, right? And obviously, the did not practice with Mike Williams today. It is very much the worst case scenario, basically, for the Chargers kind of heading out of that Week 18 gaming. Kind of like you said, it was not needed, unnecessary. And I think, to the second point of this question, just how great is their head coach? Some of it is just so baffling, right? It very much is the fact that he has definitely taken a step back this season on a lot of the in-game stuff, but even some of these, not necessarily analytic type decisions, but just the fact that he's not really succeeding in kind of evaluating where this team is currently at and what they actually need in order to kind of be successful in a playoff type on a playoff type run. Like that's got to be the concerning part long term. So although Brandon Staley was maybe a little bit of an analytic star than last year, I think the shine has very much worn off this year. And in some ways, he could be, one of the bigger reasons for why this team is being held back more so than what it actually should be, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. So let's take one more question from Ross McPherson on Twitter. Who out of the wild card weekend lineup will go on the deepest run? He puts in parentheses, I'm thinking the Jaguars, as they have serious momentum. 6 wins out of last 7, and they have Dougie P at the helm. He knows how to navigate the playoffs. I mean, that's a good one. You and I were both all over the Jags, preseason, but also midseason. Like, we saw the path. And not only did the Jags get in with like a crap, they won 9 games. Like they won out basically from 4-8, and they were 3-7 after a loss to the Chiefs. So the only team that beat them was the mighty Detroit Lions in Detroit. On this run. So there's certainly, I think, a team that has something to them. Seattle, Miami, Baltimore. I don't think really have it in them. I think the easy choice is, of course, the team that's favored this week, which is Dallas -2.5, -110 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Ben, that seems like the easiest choice, right?
Yeah, it's probably the easiest choice. I'm sure that's the one that everyone's going to gravitate to. But I don't know. The Jags kind of, I haven't been overly impressed since the Cam Robinson injury. It does seem like, they very much won the match against the Titans because of their defense and because of the fumble situation that resulted in a touchdown for them. But like we haven't seen, I would say, this offense really hitting on all cylinders since that Cam Robinson injury. And I don't think that, the receiving unit is probably as good as advertised, especially if they need to kind of win in quick separation early on because Trevor Lawrence is under duress. So I'm worried about the Chargers, I'm worried about the Jags, especially if Joey Bosa is, completely healthy, playing back to his dominant self. And I think that's probably the reason why the Chargers, have seen some at least early week betting action on that spread, moving it out to -2 basically. But I don't know. I think if I was choosing right now, I'd probably lean Chargers over Jags to kind of be I would say that preferred team in the wild card round. But we do actually have one more question as well. Cover 3 Sky, I think, asked an interesting one. I think I should ask you this because I know this is more your area of expertise. But how much does playoff success participation actually impact teams' ability to attract free agents? Consider the Bucs. Do you think the fact that they made the playoffs will ultimately help them or hurt them, i.e., is the loss of draft positioning offset by greater free agency pull?
Yeah, I think, honestly, the fact that, Florida doesn't have state income tax matters a lot more than whatever the heck that the Bucs do in the playoffs or in the regular season. So my thought is no. In fact, you do see a little bit of a bump in college football. Like TCU had something like a 30% increase in applications after, making the college football playoffs. So that, and then winning in it. But I think for NFL, it's really about market size. It's really about, getting to play with a certain quarterback, although, we haven't seen that necessarily be the case with Mahomes in Kansas City. Juju turned down the Chiefs last year before coming this year on a desperation move. So no, I think ultimately players are almost all, motivated by who's going to pay them the most and, and how well they're going to fit. So I think the answer is no. But that's a really good question by Cover 3 Sky there. I like that a lot. So let's talk about Week 19. Let's talk about these games briefly. We'll go through them sort of in order. Seattle Seahawks +10, -113. And in most markets, by the way, Ben, you're seeing this at 9.5. So this is an example of where Pinnacle is giving you, for the underdog, a half a point. It is pricey, but a half a point better than you're getting the rest of the market. What do you think about this game, Ben? Total on this game, let me look here really quickly. Total on this game is 43, Ben. Shaded to the under, though, Ben. What do you think about this game?
Yeah, definitely at +10. I like Seattle here in this spot. I think it's obviously going to be a little bit more difficult than what probably even the betting market projects. I do think, if the 49ers are going to, have the quote unquote bad game or the bad Brock Purdy game, like, I think it's going to happen early. I think it could easily happen against a division rival. And I think they are going to be at least somewhat set up to take advantage. So I like Seattle. I think, they haven't necessarily been overly efficient offensively, especially when facing off against San Francisco, but I have to believe that, at some point, like the early season progress of what Geno Smith put forth is maybe going to rear its head again here. So I like the Seahawks +10, +9.5. I think if you're taking a flyer on a long shot money line in the wild card round, I also like the Seahawks potentially on that. I don't know. It's obviously going to be weird, but I expect the NFC to be chaotic, I would say, especially to start off here.
So I don't hate this, and the market certainly has moved in that direction, but there is one data point. If you look at Sumer Sports, my current employer and the Twitter account that I run for them. If you look at average air yards on all targeted passes, the Niners are one of the bottom 5 teams in the NFL, but they are tops in average yak on all completed passes with over 7 yards yak. They're over the Panthers and over the Chiefs at 2 of the highest teams. When you look at defense, there's only one team in the NFL, and that is the Arizona Cardinals, that gives up more yak on all completed passes than the Seattle Seahawks. So when I think about this game, that is one matchup where, Brock Purdy, obviously, is young, not necessarily the greatest quarterback in the world, but could hurt them on the shorter passes that end up being longer gains in that one. So that's the only one that I'm a little bit worried about. So I would take, Seattle at +10 if it was, kind of -113 or cheaper, which is what it is. But I don't necessarily know if I'm not getting a full 10 if I would take Seattle. Next up, the Chargers that we said before, -126 on the road against the Jaguars. Ben, what do you think about this game?
Yeah, I know we've talked about this quite a bit, but I think the Joey Bosa match is obviously going to be the key if he is fully back and in the fold and healthy and everything else. The Chargers just have way too much talent, I would say, to let this one slip away. Wasn't really overly impressed with the Jaguars win, against the Titans last week. So very much, I would say, even though they've kind of been trending right the last 4 weeks, I just think that the Chargers probably have a higher peak than what the Jaguars put forth right now. So give me Los Angeles -1.5. I think is what it's at on Pinnacle right now. Actually -1, -118, which I would say is probably another pretty good price if you're looking at especially from the Chargers perspective. So I like the Chargers. You got to be on that one.
Find me dead. You couldn't find me dead betting the Chargers right now in a game they need to win against a team that's plucky. I agree. I'm not betting the Jaguars in this one, even at plus money, even with all their talent. But the Chargers just do too many things wrong. And I know they have a great quarterback, but they do whatever's necessary, I feel like, to suppress Justin Herbert. So this is another game where, the road team is probably the right side, but you're not going to find me betting it. Speaking of another road team, Miami now +10, -130. This does look like Tua Tagovailoa is playing as far as the number is concerned. It opened at 10.5. They go to Buffalo. Bills, in my opinion, are the best team in the NFL. They don't get the 1 seed by virtue of the fact that their game was a no contest against Buffalo against Cincinnati, and so forth. Ben, what do you think of this game?
I honestly, do you think this is actually like positive Tua news here? Because that is like the perplexing thing for me. Because I thought it would move further, going from like maybe assumed to be Skylar Thompson to going from Tua. I thought would maybe be it. So I don't know. Maybe it's positive Teddy Bridgewater news, but I don't love Miami at anything below 10, which just seems like it's very much, I would say, kind of heading towards. So at -130 +10, basically, for Miami, I'm not touching that spot. I'd probably wait for something, a little bit further on down if we do get confirmation of Tua's, situation. Obviously, that's going to change things if he is in the fold, but I'm not going to hope to grasp at straws, given that we haven't heard, I would say, any inclination that he is going to be ready for why this movement happened. So I'm probably just laying off this one. If I wasn't to bet anything, I'd probably be shopping for some Bills -9.5, I would say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This is a game that I actually like, Ben. This is at our hometown, Minnesota, Minneapolis. The Giants getting 3 -101. Total is in the upper 40s, 48.5, I believe. I'm all over the Giants on this one, right? Like, we saw this game played a couple weeks ago already. We were given that privilege. And the Giants lost by 3 on a last-second 60-yard field goal by the Vikings. Since then, Brian O'Neill has gotten hurt, the right tackle. The Vikings were exposed in Green Bay. They played just a half a game against Chicago, didn't look particularly great. Ben, are you on the same train as me, getting a cheap 3 on the New York Giants in Minnesota?
I'm waiting for -2.5. I know Pinnacle isn't signaling that they're going to get there, but I have seen some other books potentially move in that direction. But I don't know. I mean, the Giants were very much the Vikings before the Vikings became this like popular team that is not as good as everyone projects or whatever, right? And I think maybe that's a little bit overstated, but going back to it, I think you can glean a lot of information from how that Week 16 game played out, and going back to it, like the Vikings couldn't get a stop when they absolutely needed to. They had to have a Patrick Peterson interception, probably to win this game, which has been, you know, in some ways their MO, I would say, to kind of pull out some of these victories is Patrick Peterson making a big play, you know, after they've given up a ton of chunk yards. But so they got that play. They had, I think there was a blocked punt as well that kind of swung in the direction, an early fumble as well. So a lot of things stacked up correctly. I do think the Giants were probably the better team in that matchup. You know, Ricky James basically and Isaiah Hodgins very much, I would say, exposed what should have been a healthy Vikings secondary. And I think that's got to be the concern once again, right? If they can't figure that out, like it doesn't matter how many targets or how many receptions Justin Jefferson has. They really don't seem to be able to get a stop when they absolutely need it, unless they kind of get that high variance turnover type play. So I'm worried about the Vikings, but if it moves to -2.5, I still think it's probably just a little bit short, because I do think Justin Jefferson probably the best player in the football field, and Kirk very much, I would say, kind of showed the desire, I would say, to highlight him in their Week 16 matchup, and I think that's probably got to carry forth in a very winnable matchup for Justin Jefferson. So Vikings -2.5. If it's +3, you know, the Giants, I would say, are very much the only side you can bet.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of a number that's moved a little bit, the Ravens, they go on the road to face the Bengals. This thing opened at 6.5. It is now 7. Basically even on both sides, -107 to the Ravens, -105 to the Bengals. When you look at the total of this game, that might give you a little bit more of an indication as to who's playing quarterback for the Ravens. 42.5 to the over, -103 to the under, -109. This feels like a Tyler Huntley line and not a Lamar Jackson line. We've seen big bets on the Ravens, but we've seen numbers move towards the Bengals. Ben, this is the third time they've met. You know, the Bengals did everything they could to let the Ravens cover last week. The Ravens did cover close at 11.5, but did not cover some of the early numbers, namely, you know, 7.5 and all the way up to 10.5. This one's weird, but I do think the Bengals pull it out. I don't know if I could bet the Bengals, though. This is maybe the last game that we see the Ravens have Lamar Jackson, whether he's healthy or not. This is a weird one.
Yeah, very weird one. I do think, you know, drifting out to -7, the only play, unless you want to get involved with the over, is probably to tease the Bengals down, you know, to -1, especially if you do like Tampa Bay in that Monday night game. You could tease that up to 8.5. That's a pretty sound teaser. We have seen, you know, teasers hit at a pretty extraordinary rate in the playoffs time when we have actually had those opportunities in prior seasons. So very much with, you know, markets and numbers moving to a more efficient equilibrium, I do think teasing can definitely make some sense. So getting the Bengals off from, you know, -7 down to -1, it is a spot that I probably would play this one. I don't really feel comfortable laying a full touchdown, you know, until we have confirmation that it very much is Tyler Huntley in the fold and not Lamar Jackson, even though, kind of like you said, the number very much indicates that that's the direction that the Ravens are going to be headed in this matchup.
Yeah, very much so. All right, lastly, and you talked about this a little bit, Dallas laying 2.5, -110, kind of trending towards 3 on the road against Tampa Bay. This is a game, you know, the Bucs went to Dallas, first game of the season, absolutely killed the Cowboys. Dak got hurt. Everything was for naught there. Cooper Rush obviously came in, won all but one of his starts. Dak's come back and like led the NFL in interceptions despite not playing in those 5 games. This one's weird because I can see it going both ways. I think if you can get a 3 with Tampa Bay, you really have to take it. But Dallas does have a lot of ingredients of a great team. And, you know, you can make the case that Dak Prescott, when he's on, is the best quarterback in the NFC playoffs right now. So what do you say about this game before we move on here, Ben?
Yeah, even with like a really poor Dak performance once again here, I do think the Dallas Cowboys defense, you know, kind of backs against the wall last week against Washington, very much showed just how good they actually are. And if you don't think that they are, probably the second best defense in the NFC in this playoff picture specifically, like I don't know what to tell you, because I do think that they have it, especially, defensively along the front four, can obviously generate pressure at the highest rate in football. I do think if, Ryan Jensen isn't back and in the fold for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they are going to be missing what it sounds like they're probably going to be missing, backup Robert Hainsley, who basically did get banged up with a hamstring injury in that Week 18 matchup. So if they're allowing a ton of interior pressure against the best pressure team in the NFL, like that, it might not matter how bad Dak Prescott is, because I do think the Cowboys could easily win this one defensively alone. So I don't know. I do agree with you. I think Tampa's the only side at +3, but now that we are seeing some 2.5s pop up into the market, I think that's a spot where I'd probably lean in Dallas's direction, and maybe even, wouldn't mind getting on something like a first half spread for Dallas and kind of seeing how that one progresses. I think that Pinnacle has that at like -1.5, -101 for the price for Dallas on the first half spread. That's probably the spot where I'd be playing this game right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just so excited for this playoff weekend. Now that, we have, more, 6 games, I think it has become the best weekend. Obviously that Dallas, Tampa Bay game's going to be Monday night, which is a lot of fun. You and I, when we were both at Pro Football Focus, used to do these live betting shows. And last year, the Monday night, the first ever one was a dud between Arizona and Los Angeles. I think this one's going to be a little bit better than that. Speaking of a dud, Ben, Georgia 65, TCU 7. I liked under 63.5 in this game. It did not hit, of course, mostly because Georgia could not be stopped against TCU. Right. What's next for Stetson Bennett?
I mean, he's going to get drafted at some point. He might be drafted to be like, Tom Brady's backup or something like that. I do think it would be a fitting career arc for him at this point in time. But yeah, I don't know exactly what round he's going to land in. I would say the 3rd or the 4th round is probably a decent spot for him. But, a lot of the guys that I thought were intriguing mid-round draft prospects at the quarterback position are kind of opting back in and going the NIL route. And I do think that's going to create, more opportunities for some of these guys who maybe would have fallen further down draft boards, especially this year with NIL kind of taking over. Definitely creates an opportunity for guys like Stetson Bennett. But I don't know. I don't really see, a long-term career for him being really successful at the NFL level outside of being, a pretty sound backup quarterback. But I don't know. I was with you on the under. Thankfully, I had Georgia first half as well, which kind of paid, at least allowed me to break even on the matchup. But Georgia was a house, man. I think this, is very much the start of what could be a very dominating time period for them, specifically in college football.
Yeah, absolutely. And they were so good. And you and I have given out winners all year on this show. One loser that we did give out was South Dakota State. We like North Dakota State getting, 5.5 or so. Right. It opened at 3.5. Our numbers made it 2.5. Our numbers were wrong. South Dakota State absolutely killed North Dakota State. It got to 7-7. I was like, okay, Ben, something's happening here. It got to 28-7 really fast, Ben. And it ended 45-21. South Dakota State is just a better team. I think they have an NFL tight end. North Dakota State just can't really pass the football. So that was really the end result there. I don't know if you watched much of that, Ben. I do know you did have some on North Dakota State, which of course is unfortunate. But that was all my fault because I handicapped the game and I like North Dakota State. So that was a loser. Basically, we're done with NCAA college football. Ben, do you have any sort of overarching view on not only the FBS but the FCS this year?
I mean, it was fun, right? I think this was probably the first year that we consistently bet the FCS. I thought it went, quite well. I do think it creates, a number of opportunities and markets that are definitely overlooked to find some value. And I do think that, continuing on, in that area, especially on some first half numbers for some of those teams, I think makes a lot of sense. So I enjoyed the FCS. I do think, I have a pretty close friend who works at South Dakota State's at the school as a coach, as a soccer coach. And, he was texting me the whole time questioning why I would ever bet North Dakota State. So I got it from, a number of different angles. Basically, I had to, not only let my friends down, but I had to let my bankroll down as well, unfortunately, on that one. But we'll learn. We're obviously going to rebound a little bit here. FCS can't come soon enough. Unfortunately, we're not going to get any spring FCS like we did a couple years ago, but we will have the XFL, and a couple other, I would say, spring leagues to talk about football wise coming up here relatively soon as well.
Yeah, XFL, USFL, Pinnacle. If you want us to do a show on those, we will, at least sparingly here. But that was the NFL Insights for another week. We're at Pinnacle Podcast on all platforms to follow and keep up to date on all Pinnacle's latest shows. Plus, to keep across Pinnacle's betting resources page for Ben's latest article delving into everything NFL playoffs with a detailed betting analysis of each team. Ben, I remember when we were young and you were writing about fantasy football, and I would come in and help with ownership projections. Now you're writing for the best sports book in the world. I'm really proud of you there. So, thanks for listening. We'll be back before the championship games. Odds are correct as time of the recording. Please gamble responsibly. So for Ben Brown at PFF_Ben Brown on Twitter, I'm Eric Eager at Eric Eager_. Thanks for listening to the NFL Insights podcast from Pinnacle.